Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We have got a good one for you for our first show of August, so let's jump right in. And we are beginning things today with a check on the cattle markets. July's mid-year estimate for U.S. cattle inventory showed a decrease at the national level, with beef-related inventory 1.3% lower than a year ago. The lowered beef numbers were the largest mid-year decrease in 9 years. University of Missouri livestock economist Scott Brown joined me this week to discuss what he is observing in the markets. We began our interview by talking about the sideways movement being seen with live cattle.
Well, I think you're right, Troy, when you describe it as a lot of sideways. And I think we continue to have a lot of folks who see that and go, yeah, box beef prices have continued to be much higher. Why aren't we seeing some higher live cattle prices? I guess for me, potentially as we move forward, the thing that I think is going to help us here is probably fewer supplies of market-ready cattle coming as we get into the latter part of 2021. I won't be surprised for us to start to see some better price strength than we have as numbers start to move down. That may not come soon enough for a lot of folks, but I still get more optimistic as we look later this year and into early next.
Scott, what's your focus on this season's crop and how that plays into the feeder cattle market?
I guess for me, we're sure focused an awful lot on what's going to happen in terms of the crop this fall. To me, I think weather's gotten better in many parts of the corn growing regions of the U.S. That might translate into some warmer feeder cattle prices as we get later in the year. And I also then think the drought of the West and the Northern Plains may have got us where we're shipping some more feeder cattle to feed yards sooner than normal. And I think that has some implications. So I guess, again, I come there and I go, well, we could be more optimistic or have higher prices, as we start talking about trying to sell some of those spring-born calves.
And beef demand still looking strong. How do you think that'll play out heading into Labor Day in a few weeks?
Yeah, so I think we're in a part of the season where we are going to see some additional strength as we head towards Labor Day. We've really not seen any signs of beef demand weakening thus far in 2021. I still worry, if you think back to the very early part of COVID-19, we had a lot of concerns about the drag on the general economy. And we see none of that. Now, I think we have to remind ourselves that the opening of food service created a real pull that is waning. I don't say turned down, but we're not gonna need to fill that pipeline like we did when food service reopened. And so I'm watching some of those things right now, but generally demand for beef has continued to be strong.
Okay, Scott, so that's what we're seeing now. But then you look at the drought combined with reductions in herd numbers. What's the outlook?
Yeah, so I think the drought that we're currently experiencing in the West and I say Northern Plains, the Dakotas, Minnesota, et cetera, that's going to have some long-run implications. I think cattlemen are very focused on prices aren't so great today. And I keep saying, I hear you and I agree with that statement. However, don't lose sight of what potentially is coming here. I don't know, roughly 30% or so of the beef cow herd is setting in areas with drought concerns. That's certainly not as high as we were back in the 2012 drought, but significant. I think as those impacts continue to work their way through the system, which might be late 22, 2023, there's a chance for some much higher cattle prices. So I want to send the message of, yes, pay attention to what's happening today. I know that's what you have to live with, the reality of today, but don't lose sight of what might be coming as you plan, your size of operation going forward. there's a lot of places in this country where we aren't talking drought that I think are going to benefit from what's been a terrible situation in the western part of the U.S. and in the Dakotas in particular.
And real quick on beef exports, just looking really good. What more can you say?
Absolutely. I think, we have to remind ourselves that China matters here a lot in terms of what's been happening in beef exports. If you look at the combination of China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, year to date, we're up about 90% in beef exports to those places. However, I don't want to forget some of the traditional ones as we talk as well. South Korea has been really strong as well. I have them up about 30% year to date in terms of beef exports. To me, we don't want to set so many big issues going on that I think sometimes we forget. I keep saying the growth in demand for all meats, beef in particular, is certainly going to come probably outside the United States. And seeing these early signs of places like China increasing exports is nothing but a win for us long term.
All right, Scott, great information today. Let's end it with any marketing or risk management advice that you would like to mention that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, so I think generally in terms of risk management, as I look at cattle in particular, to me, there's a lot more maybe upside potential than downside risk right now. So I wouldn't get too wrapped up in a lot of risk management strategies trying to protect against lower prices. Of course, there are those big issues like we had an outbreak of FMD in this country that could be real terrible to cattle markets. But to me, there's a lot of positives right now. So I'm a little less worried about using dollars to do risk protection right now. To me, the drought is just going to be the bigger, longer term story that we get to face. And so I'm a little less worried about that risk protection right now than maybe in the past. If you're going to do it, sometimes I go looking at the USDA LRP product, for example, might be a good alternative to get something relatively inexpensive to protect maybe some of that lowest downside risk that might unfold.
Next week, we'll be joined by Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners. If you have a question that you would like for me to ask him, you can email us or get a hold of us on social media, and I'll be sure and pass that question along. Next up, as summer continues, producers are dealing with hot and dry conditions, and they may also encounter blue-green algae in ponds and dugouts. It's an issue that could lead to undesirable health impacts on your cattle. Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with the Nebraska Extension educator Amy Timmerman to discuss some ways to manage the problem.
Cyanobacteria blooms, or blue-green algae as they're typically known, have a penchant for coming on with consistent hot and dry weather. While not all blue-green algae is toxic, it's important to keep in mind it could still have a disastrous impact on the water your livestock depends on. When it comes to mitigating these type of algae blooms, the more you understand how they develop could be beneficial in understanding how to limit them.
So for blue-green algae blooms, they're actually influenced by high nitrogen and phosphorus loads. So any way that we can prevent nitrogen and phosphorus from flowing into that pond or dugout is really the big key. So we're going to be looking at buffer strips around the pond if need be. Any of our other, management practices to conserve nitrogen and phosphorus with proper tillage, watering, different components like that will really be one of the big components. And the other big one for cattle is making sure cattle aren't standing in those ponds and dugouts and defecating into that water, because that's a huge nitrate load that's going directly into that water.
If you think you may be dealing with the toxic effects of a blue-green algae bloom, there are several signs you should try to stay aware of before it's too late.
So if you suspect you're having a problem, the big thing is you need to go out and you need to walk your ponds and dugouts and take a look. The first telltale sign that you have a problem is looking for dead wildlife. So the wildlife are just as susceptible to the toxin as the cattle. So if you're seeing dead turtles, snakes, rabbits, raccoons, that is an indication that we probably have a problem going on. So for our cattle that have been exposed to the toxin in blue-green algae, what you're going to be looking for is we can see those symptoms developing within 2 to 4 hours after consumption. And they are basic neurological: stumbling, unsteadiness affecting our liver. We're going to see pale mucous membranes in that mouth. And then eventually we're just going to see the animal convulsing and then just dying from all the impact of this toxin. So the sad part is there isn't a magical cure that we can give these cattle once they've consumed it. If you believe they've been in contact with it, you can try to have them ingest some charcoal to help offset the impacts of the toxin, but it isn't a for sure that it's going to save that animal.
When it comes to livestock that may have been exposed to these algae blooms, it's important to keep in mind some varieties of livestock may have more severe reactions than others.
So it's not specific to cattle breed. All animals are all 100% susceptible to it. However, if we have a low dosage exposure for our light colored skinned animals, so I'm going to pick on Charolais that are white and skinned, they can actually have a photosensitivity reaction to it. So what they end up doing is, because of their light colored skin, they're more sensitive to the sun. So they get a really bad sunburn. And just like you and I, when we're sunburned, the skin's going to blister and then it's going to peel. And so these animals are very sensitive to the sun for several days. And the best course of treatment for those animals is actually to put them in the barn during the daytime hours to protect them from the sun, because it isn't like you can put sunscreen on them or put a shirt on them. Put them in the barn and let them out at night. It may recover within a week. It may take a month for them to actually recover from that photosensitivity, but it's only our light skinned cattle. So anything that's white hide will experience that type of reaction.
If you're wanting to test your water source for blue-green algae, there are several factors you should consider when collecting and submitting a sample.
The other trick is I'm going to really encourage those ranchers to walk to the leeward side of that pond or dugout, which is downwind. Since the bacteria is only on the surface, it will congregate in concentrations down there. So go to the leeward side, look for that film or scum on the water surface. That film or scum can actually be blue or green, but it can also be yellow or red in coloration when it's actively growing. But you take a look there. And if we see that and you're really concerned, what you need to do is you're going to collect a water sample just like you do for groundwater. You're going to dip it in. You're going to collect that water sample in a clear, clean jar within those top 6 inches. But when you do that, I really encourage people to wear a glove, some type of rubber glove, because the toxin is dangerous to us too, and it's for your safety. So you need at least 100 milliliters. So I usually recommend you need at least 200 or 300 milliliters to be on the safe side. Put a cap on it, and then make sure you get that sample in the refrigerator. If we keep it at room temperature or on the dash of your pickup, the bacteria is going to continue to grow. And it's going to give you a false positive per se. So keep it refrigerated, send it in a refrigerated container. I recommend it ship it Monday through Wednesday to assure that the lab gets it in time and it doesn't sit in the UPS truck or FedEx over the weekend with no air conditioning. And currently the only lab we have in the state that will test for blue-green algae is Midwest Laboratories in Omaha.
While there are several factors at play that can accelerate the growth of a blue-green algae bloom, when it comes to dealing with the hot, dry weather conditions that we have been, it's imperative to stay vigilant of the water sources your livestock depend on. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Amy also tells us when digging a new pond or dugout for a potential water source, it's important to dig to a depth of at least 10 feet. That way, if algae blooms become a problem, you'll be able to pump water from below the buildup to ensure the cattle don't drink tainted water. For more information on managing blue-green algae blooms, we've included a link on the Market Journal website. Moving on now, and University of Nebraska field days, extension events, and in-person meetings are back in full force across the state this summer. Mike Boehm, Harlan Vice Chancellor for Nebraska's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, has been busy meeting with growers and commodity boards. He joined me to talk about some of IANR's new initiatives and the exciting things happening within the Institute.
Had a chance to go out to Kearney recently and visit with the soybean board, and that was a real treat because that was the morning that UNL faculty, IANR faculty, were showcasing the research findings from the research that the soybean board promotes, and had a chance to give an update and then actually visit and have lunch with members of the board. And both the corn board and the soybean board have been recently tremendous partners here in a partnership that CASNR, the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources, has with Lincoln Public Schools, where both of those boards put $25,000 on the table to be used by Lincoln Northeast High School science, social study, and math teachers to rewrite their entire 9th grade curriculum, such that every 9th grader showing up at Northeast Lincoln High School will learn their social studies, math, and science through the lens of food, energy, water, and societal systems. It's a fantastic program. I had a chance to visit with reps from both those boards and 35 school teachers, and just amazing. And we're doing similar things in Northeast Nebraska and out in the Panhandle. So none of that would be possible without the board. So thanks to all the members of the commodity boards. We really appreciate the partnership.
Yeah, very, very cool. Always happy to have all those groups on board. So also this summer, and you know, we could spend 30 minutes talking about the research that IANR is doing, but you know, continuing to hit it out of the park and so much momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, surprising things happen with the COVID, right? It was a tough period. I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but we modified our team members, our faculty, staff, students, our producers, everybody just, you know, demonstrated the Nebraska grit and tenacity and innovated through that whole time. And, you know, it was amazing. We had a record high year in our research. That was incredible. IANR faculty were responsible for 47% of all research expenditures at UNL. You know, kudos to the faculty, but kudos also to the students, and thanks again to the commodity boards. Yeah, records wherever you looked, record number of grants submitted, record number of new grants awarded. I think we had 470 grants awarded. So this was really pretty spectacular, no question about it.
And if you could speak for a second regarding precision ag, because Nebraska is becoming a real leader in that technology.
Yeah, I would say we've always been a real leader, but I think truth of the matter is that we are doing all kinds of incredible work in precision. So if we think about drought, certainly the National Drought Mitigation Center and the National Drought Monitor, such a jewel, an asset, 25 years in the making. We've got the High Plains Climate Center, we've got the State Meteorological Office, we've got the Conservation Survey Division. I mean, tying all of that together. So when I think about climate, drought, resilience, the economic impact, it's all integrated, and we do integrated systems thinking better than anywhere in the country. And so where are we going? Well, we've been working with Congressman Jeff Fortenberry's office. He's been advocating quite intensively as the ranking member of the Ag Subcommittee for the House Appropriations Committee. And part of that is to create a new center on the Innovation Campus around resilient and regenerative precision agriculture. So that will more than double the footprint of USDA Agriculture Research Service scientists and engineers here in Lincoln. If all this goes as planned, we should see nearly 100 USDA scientists and engineers all focused on precision and resilient ag. And guess what? That marries up nice to our 600 faculty here. So it's a kind of a 1-2 punch, and that will squarely punctuate for the entire country and the world that the Silicon Prairie is the place for precision agriculture and natural resource management. Pretty exciting.
Thanks to Dr. Boehm for taking the time to speak with us. You can check out the full interview on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Next up, Bill Aug joined the staff of the Nebraska State Fair as Executive Director last June. He helped the State Fair navigate the COVID-impacted youth-focused fair in 2020, but Aug says he's looking forward to a full schedule of activities for the 2021 State Fair in Grand Island. The Nebraska State Fair dates back to 1859. That's before Nebraska was even a state. The modern 2021 version, though, is running August 27th through September 6th and will be filled with entertainment, livestock shows, and festivities that showcase Nebraska agriculture and Nebraska life at its best. You can read more about the upcoming Nebraska State Fair in the August issue of Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, over here in Lincoln at least, we're starting to warm up a little bit. How's the week shaping up for the rest of the state?
Well, Troy, we did see those cool temperatures during the early part of the week, and as the week gradually progressed, we've seen those temperatures ramp up, and some of the 90-degree weather in the Panhandle finally made its way into eastern Nebraska as we got into Thursday and Friday. And of course, we've seen some precipitation kind of scattered, but nothing really significant outside of a few small pockets, particularly around the Lexington area, a little bit toward the north and the east of Grand Island, where we've seen some of the thunderstorm activity, from Wednesday night. Of course, we've seen some isolated thunderstorms since then, and now we have a main precipitation band potentially going to hit eastern Nebraska as we go through this next 24 hours. And then things start to look a little bit weaker in terms of precipitation chances, with more heat returning, unfortunately, as we go through the early part of next week, and then we'll see a return of that heat potentially a little later down the road. So let's take a look at the upper air models, and the first thing I'll draw your attention to is that we do have a trough that is moving through the Central Plains right as we speak, and this is expected to generate some thunderstorm activity with the best likelihood across eastern Nebraska. So the surface low up in eastern, northeastern South Dakota will actually have some moisture feeding up from the Gulf of Mexico. Looks like we'll see thunderstorm development across the eastern 1/3 of the state and western Iowa. And as we go into tomorrow, that low pressure trough will start to move toward the northeast and the western Great Lakes. We'll still keep some residual precipitation around eastern Nebraska. Another low sets up in eastern Montana. You can see that most of the heavier precipitation is expected to be generated over Iowa, but I wouldn't rule out that we'll see some half-inch to inch amounts across eastern Nebraska. Going to Monday, there'll be an upper air trough starting to move its way across the northern plains. Low pressure will set up over north central Kansas. There will be some moisture bringing northward, so we might see some isolated thunderstorm activity across the southeastern part of the state, but more concentrated to our east. This trough begins to move toward the Great Lakes, and that will pull some cooler air in finally as we get into Tuesday into our region and start to break the 90-degree temperatures. Low pressure will set up over north central Kansas, and the GFS model at least is showing that we may see a thunderstorm complex developing over east central and southeastern Nebraska. As we get to Wednesday, this trough starts to lift off, and once again we start to see the ridge building back into our region, so we're going to start to see a gradual ramp up of our temperatures. Doesn't look like we'll see much in the way of precipitation over the northwestern part of the state, but once again that frontal boundary will hang up across southern Nebraska, and we may generate once again some thunderstorm activity. On Thursday, a weak trough tries to progress across the northern part of the state. We don't have a lot of lift with this system, but we can't rule out some isolated thunderstorm activity, sort of like what we've seen earlier this week. And then as we get into Friday, another trough tries to drive into the northern Rockies, but will still be well above normal temperature-wise across the southern part of the state. And probably the second half of next week, and when that trough will start to make an impact on Nebraska. So for the most part, we'll be expecting some sticky conditions. An isolated thunderstorm can't be ruled out, but our temperature definitely will be above normal as we move back up into the upper 80s to the mid-90s, depending on where you are in the state. If we go a little farther down the road, above normal temperatures are predicted by the Climate Prediction Center from next Thursday to the following Tuesday. And in terms of precipitation, below normal precipitation, but I would watch this trough. It may generate a little bit more activity than is currently showed on this model, but overall, it does look like we will see warm temperatures at least through Monday, and then we'll start to see a slight cooling trend before we warm back up later in next week for the temperatures.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, located in the heart of the Sandhills is the Gudmundsen Sandhills Laboratory. This facility is at the forefront of developing plant and animal systems that are economically and environmentally sustainable. And if you've never visited before, you won't have a better opportunity than this. On August 25th, GSL will host its 22nd annual open house. Due to COVID, last year's event was presented in a virtual format. This year, though, the in-person open house is back, but it will include a virtual component, giving those who can't attend another way to participate.
So, last year we went with a virtual event because of COVID. And so what it did, it allowed us to increase that outreach that we could have. And we had multiple other states, multiple other countries that joined in. And so the reason behind this year for the hybrid is because that capacity, that the outreach that we got last year with the multiple other states and countries, is to allow that segment to actually be a part of the open house and increase that range of outreach that we can provide. So for most part, outside of a few sections at the end of the day that we go over the general research updates at Gudmundsen, people that are joining us from a virtual side are not going to miss the big part of the open house with our invited and keynote speakers.
Presentations and other breakout sessions will be held in the Wagon Hammer Education Center. Guest speakers will cover a wide range of topics, sure to be beneficial for any livestock producer.
I think we're putting on a really good program for producers. You think about sustainability and what some things that have been thrown at our producers, whether or not it's increased drought, increased market volatility, it's the environmental side. And so we've got a really good program for producers to get a big insight and some really good keynote speakers from the sustainability side of, what does sustainability from a ranch scale look like? And how does producers themselves be able to preach their sustainability to our consumers and tell their own story of how they are really environmental friendly and produce an environmental safe product for consumers.
Once again, the event is August 25th from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It's free to attend, but you must register for the event by August 18th to take advantage of the complimentary lunch. You can register online or by phone. That number is 308-696-6700. Everything you need to know is right there on the screen, and it's included on the Market Journal website too. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, Extension entomologist Julie Peterson discusses the importance of scouting fields and pest management strategies. Plus, Jeff Peterson will break down what's happening in the markets. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.